Good evening, Hops fans. Happy New Year. Welcome to Programmes in 2022. Hello everyone, welcome to HOPS Live Workshop number 22. We're over 2 years in now, can you believe it? On this time on the subject of managing competence for duty officers and controllers. Say hello in the comments, let us know what your name is and what railway or organisation you're from, and I'll be sure to say hello to you. Let's see who's watching so far tonight. Mark Craddock from the Bodmin and Wenford Railway. Hello Mark, you're first in line today. Thank you for tuning in. Adam Williams from the Dean Forest, Tom Bailey from Etchells Wood, both of whom have got a little number 5 star by their name, which I think is how many videos they've tuned into, so well done. Hello Ruth, one of our keenest watchers from the Weardale Railway, Paul Richardson. I can't see what railway you're from, Paul. Graham Wigglesworth from the Crouch Tramway. We'll be talking about the Crouch Tramway in just a moment. Peter Whiteley, hello to you. Jennifer Edmonds from Australia, brilliant. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for tuning in from the West Coast Wilderness Railway in Australia. Angus Rex, Happy New Year from Scotland. Angus from the Bowness Railway, thank you very much. Mel Clark from the Own Valley. Oh my goodness, there's loads of you. This is brilliant. Andy Green from the Cambrian Heritage Railway. Matt Simpson from the Bodmin and Wenford. I can't keep up with this. Hello, Matt Cleave from the Cholsey and Wallingford, and John Hagan from Didcot Railway Centre. Oh my goodness, if I don't get to the end of the list by the time the music ends, I'm going to have to stop, I'm afraid. Paul Harley from Newport, but also a duty manager from Didcot Railway Centre. Thanks for tuning in. Hugh Parker from the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust. That's the Tornado organisation. Thank you very much. Last couple of ones here then. Gordon Steadman from Wensleydale and Johnny Pay from the Spa Valley. So hello everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a great turnout. Well done. If you have any comments or questions as we go along, you're very welcome to write them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. But let's do a bit of news and housekeeping first. First of all, just to remind you, the HOPS Roadshow starts in a couple of weeks' time. The first weekend has moved online, I'm afraid, due to COVID precautions, but maybe that's no bad thing. Maybe some more people might be able to attend than otherwise would have because it's online. Then we resume the face-to-face weekend, Saturday the 5th of February at Bishop's Lydiard, Saturday the 5th of March at Tunbridge Wells, Saturday the 19th of March at the Crouch Tramway, and Sunday the 20th of March at Beamish Museum. Spaces are limited, so it is necessary to book ahead. Please email in or raise a ticket or just get in contact in any way if you want to book a space. It's open to everybody, whether you're already a HOPS user organisation or not. And there's no cost to attend. So thank you very much to everybody who's helped in putting that programme together and to all our friends at all those locations for hosting us. I'm sure, as you know, the HOPS Live SMS workshop programme has now resumed because you're watching the video. Every 6 weeks from now on a Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. 6 weeks from today will be user work level crossings. 6 weeks after that, rule books and structures. Continuing on the theme of SMSs. And the various other subjects that you've asked us to cover. You can find out more information about this at hops.org.uk/workshops. You can also see all the previous videos on HOPS YouTube channel. Once again, no fees to attend any of this and no need to book ahead. Just tune in live at 7 p.m. There is some discussion about whether Facebook or YouTube or some other method is the best way to do these live broadcasts, so I'll be very interested to hear your views on what you think makes them the most accessible. I just picked Facebook because I knew how it worked. I'm not precious about how we do them. And whichever platform we do them live on, we will then copy them to the other platforms afterwards. Oh, another suggestion is that we did them on something like Teams or Zoom or one of those types of platforms, so that instead or as well as writing comments, the participants could actually, put their hand up and then speak and ask the question verbally. And it might encourage a bit more back and forth communication and improve the workshop. So thank you very much everyone for your feedback and comments on that. Do please let me know if you've got a view, and obviously we'll do whatever's going to help you the most. Last thing in the news, the HOPS Annual General Forum. This is for advanced HOPS member organisations. So if you're not an advanced HOPS member organisation, you know what to do. There's 2 annual general forums, one on Tuesday the 15th of March at 7 p.m. and one's on Wednesday the 16th of March at 9 a.m. They're both the same. You don't have to attend both of them. You only need to attend one or the other. It's just 2 different times so that if you're a volunteer or employed, or if you're in the UK or in Australia, hopefully one of those times is convenient for you. There'll be a presentation from somebody who likes to talk a lot on the previous year in HOPS and plans for the year ahead, and then open mic for anyone who wants to raise anything that they want to about HOPS, about what they think of HOPS or what they want to see in the future. If you're going to ask something particularly controversial or that might require me to research an answer, feel free to let me know in advance, and if I'm going to need to research the answer in order to let you know. It's open to advanced HOPS member organisations. As with everything, there's no additional fee to attend, but booking is required, so please let us know if you want to attend, and then we can send you the meeting link. Right, that's it for the news. On to HOPS workshop number 22. As you've seen 21 times before, here are the rules of the workshop. Please join in is rule number 1 in the comments. Especially if you disagree with something or you've got a different way or a better way. Commenting it in the comments is the mechanism for you to share your best practice or for you to challenge what I'm saying, because I'm not putting this up as a golden answer for what you should be doing. As you know, this is just one idea, one set of what I think is pretty good practice from all the railways that I've spoken to and been involved in, and from the railways that kindly send me in their section of the SMS that refers to what we're going to be talking about in the workshop, so that I can steal best practice ideas out of it. And if you haven't done that before, please feel free to do that when you know a workshop is coming up on a certain thing. If you're happy to send your SMS in, I won't let anyone know that it came from you, so don't worry about sort of either people thinking that it's particularly good or particularly bad, or whether there's a liability issue. I'll just take the spirit of the text and put it into the best practice document. Okay, anyway, so please join in. That's rule number 1. Share your experience with others and learn from others, because we can all learn, including me, certainly. Videos will be uploaded onto YouTube afterwards, and they're also available on Facebook forevermore. Oh, having said that, I have taken a couple of old videos down from the very early workshops that we did, and that's just because those ones focused on HOPS as it was at the time, and as you know, HOPS moves on quite a lot, and they've been and they no longer accurately represent the way to do things in HOPS. So I have taken a couple of the early ones off because they could now be a little bit more confusing than helpful. The aim of the SMS workshops is to construct a best practice set of templates, because at the moment we all have to have an SMS, we're all sitting here thinking about it, we're all duplicating that thinking time, and in most cases coming up with pretty similar answers in every case. So the purpose of this is to produce a set of templates based on the best practice that you've all sent in and that we discuss in the workshop, save us all a bit of time, save us all a bit of cost, and share the best practice. Give us all the opportunity to demonstrate that we've given our SMS a bit of a road test with our peer organisations. And finally, as I said before, we are definitely not saying that this is what you must do. We're definitely not saying that, and we're certainly not in any position of authority to say that. And we're not saying this is guaranteed to be suitable for every single undertaking. As with everything, you're the duty holder. It's your responsibility to make sure that whether you choose to pick only one sentence out of the workshop and use it in your SMS, or the entire template and use it in your SMS, that it's appropriate for your undertaking. Only you can make that decision. Right, okay, a couple of little bits on the presentation before we look at the templates then, as always. First of all, the controversial subject of the job title. Let's start with the title. I've called it Duty Officer. That's just because when I've thought about this before of what's a good title, Duty Officer is normally what I end up concluding is the most appropriate title. But it really doesn't matter what you call your daily person in charge. As far as our structure of SMSs is concerned, as we've talked about in HOPS, this is going to be a function supervisor type role, which means that it is not a person who is appointed to that role forever. It's a shift role, that you come on duty, you're the duty officer from 9 till 5, and then when you go home or somebody else relieves you, you're no longer the duty officer. The same as the person who is on duty as the driver or on duty as the signalman. They're only that responsibility while they're on duty. Unlike, perhaps, the operations manager or the general manager who's appointed to the role, one named person forever or for a good number of years, and whether they're at work in the office or at home in bed, they are the operations manager. So the duty officer, in my imagination, and as far as I've made this template for you, is a shift role, a function supervisor role in the context of the SMSs that we've talked about so far. So any of these terms are perfectly suitable terms: duty officer, duty operations officer, duty manager, controller. They're all words that I've heard used in heritage railways to mean the thing that we're talking about, the person who is leading the ship on the day. On some railways, especially those with not extensive signalling, and particularly the narrower gauge railways, tend to steer more towards the word controller, especially if there's some sort of radio communication type movement authority system involved. So certainly I imagine those railways are going to steer towards the word controller, whereas perhaps the railways with the more extensive signalling systems and more of the movement of trains controlled by a signalman will aim for one of the other three. It'll also be determined as to by exactly what you expect your person in charge on the day to be doing, and how much, for example, of an interaction you expect them to have with commercial things and the shop and ticket sales, or whether you expect them to completely ignore all that and just concentrate on what we might call the operational stuff. We don't like the term responsible officer. Sorry if that upsets people who use that term responsible officer, and I know there are some of you here that are listening. And the reason that we've steered away from the term responsible officer in the past is everybody is responsible. And we don't put the word responsible on the beginning of driver and say you're the responsible driver, or guard and say you're the responsible guard. Everybody is responsible for as far as their responsibilities are defined in the rulebook and the SMS and things like that. And to have a responsible officer, we felt, implied that there was more of a responsibility on that person than perhaps there should be, and less responsibility on everybody else who didn't have the word responsible in front of their job title. Again, I'd just like to repeat, it's just what we came up with. We're not saying you have to do that, and if you have your heart set on the term responsible officer, then that's absolutely fine, because it's completely up to you. Other terms that we don't like for this role is terms like general manager and operations manager, because, as I said a second ago, they're much more appropriate for long-term permanent roles rather than shift roles. I can't think of any railways, thank goodness, that have a duty operations manager or a duty general manager. Generally, general manager, operations manager, commercial manager, engineering manager, terms like that are used for permanent appointments, and I think that's a good thing. Okay, I'm going to use the term duty officer from now on, but you can call it whatever you like. Right, what have we got next? Oh yeah, so here's some bullet points about the type of role that I think we're talking about. And even though I might be repeating what I've already said in the last few minutes, I think it's important to understand what we're talking about, not just so that we can all agree or disagree and you can make comments on what you think a duty officer ought to do, but also so that you understand where we were coming from when we built the templates. And if you think, oh, that's a bit strong, we don't expect the duty officer to do that much, then you might want to tone the templates down a little bit. And if you think, oh no, the duty officer has to do much more than that, as I say, especially the type of railways where they're also issuing radio movement authorities to trains, you might want to add a load more bullet points. But this sort of middle ground where I've made the templates, the duty officer is on site providing management. They're the manager of the day. There may well be more senior managers in the office doing paperwork or whatever it is, but in terms of the delivery of the service and the delivery of operations on the day, they're the person who's supposed to have their finger on the pulse and be leading and managing in real time from the front. The duty officer has a real good role to play in giving guidance to staff on how to deliver a good product, how to be safe, how to be efficient, and how to be professional. And a duty officer is no good if they're sitting in the office reading the paper waiting for something to happen. I used the phrase finger on the pulse earlier, and that's exactly what I would expect a duty officer to be, is to be the first person to notice when something is running a bit late or something's going a bit wrong or not quite as planned, and to be the person to proactively step in and do something about it, not to wait for the problem to come to them and then huff and sigh and say, oh, well, I suppose I'll do something about it if I absolutely have to. It's not, in my mind, again, as I've seen in some places, a role that's only there for emergencies. And if there's no emergency, then the duty officer doesn't actually have to do anything. We want the duty officer to be proactive, leading a proactive shift, leading a proactive railway, and not letting the railway run them. The duty officer will have rules knowledge for all operations being supervised. Rules knowledge, and I've put that in italics. You can decide what the level of rules knowledge is that a duty officer needs to have, but I don't propose that they have to be competent as every single role, because I think it'll be quite difficult to staff a duty officer roster if you require them to be guards and signalmen and drivers and dispatchers and everything else. Ideally, as we'll come on to in a minute, what I think is good practice is to say a duty officer must have at least one operational role. They've got to be fully competent as either a driver or a signalman or a guard or whatever else you decide, to make sure that they've got that underpinning rules knowledge for them to confidently understand what's going on and confidently lead the railway. Now, depending on how your rules are structured and how your rules exams are structured, you might require them to your definition of rules knowledge might be you've got to do the rules exam for every module of the rule book. If that is how your rules exams are lined up, if you have the sections A to U or whatever they are, and you say guards have to do these 3 and signalmen have to do those 4 and drivers have to do those 5, you might say, well, duty officers, you have to do the whole lot. On the other hand, if your rules exams are arranged more like there's a rules paper for drivers and there's a rules paper for signalmen and there's a rules paper for guard, it's a bit more difficult to pick the things out of all those 3 that you want a duty officer to do. Maybe you'll have to write a separate rules paper for duty officers. When we go through the templates in a second, I've got the normal SMS template for you, and then I've also got some templates of assessment criteria, assessment sheets to help you as well. So that's my thinking. Rules knowledge for all operations being supervised, but does not necessarily have to be competent as every single role there is on the railway. They do need some management skills and some management credibility, though. We all know people, I'm sure, who are the most competent in rules, but no good at managing anything. We also know people, I'm sure, who are very good at managing things, but don't actually know any of the rules or have any competencies in that respect. So the duty officer person needs to have some sort of management clout, management credibility, ability to be willing to stand up and say, hang on a minute, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this, or to challenge unsafe behaviour, or if necessary, in extremis, to tell somebody who might have been doing the job for 40 years longer than they have that they're going to get taken off the job because of some incident and medi-screened or whatever it's going to be. They've got to pick somebody who's got the management skills to do that. Adam has just made a very good point, Adam from the Dean Forest Railway, in terms of deciding which rules knowledge duty officers should have. And of course, I can't believe I missed the opportunity to mention that rules exams would be elements in HOPS. And Adam points out that we need the OR function in competence elements. And yes, I know we do. There's many reasons why we need the OR function. At the moment, we only have an AND function to say for this role, you need element 1 and element 2 and element 3. It is on the way eventually. I'm not going to give it a date, but it is on the way that eventually we will have you can have element 1 or element 2 or element 3. So in this case, we could say you need driver's rules or signalman's rules or guard's rules. Because I know that the moment I do that, you'll ask for the next step. I'm going to do the next step as well to say that you can have, for example, open brackets A or B, close brackets and C, and whatever logical operations you want like that. So it will come, but at the moment it's not there. Non-technical skills are a really important thing to consider when appointing a duty officer, and as we'll see when we go through the competence templates in a minute, some of the things I've put in there are completely non-technical. And non-technical skills, if you're not familiar, they're something that are concentrated on very heavily on the main line, in addition to technical skills like rules. Non-technical skills are things like how good is a person at communicating, how good are they at working under pressure, how good are they at working as a team, how good are they at making decisions, things like that. And of all the roles on a railway, they all require non-technical skills, but I would say a duty officer is one that requires a very strong consideration of non-technical skills. The duty officer can either steer or sink the ship, and I think that's very important, that especially when things are going a little bit awry or there's a little bit of a delay, a good duty officer will steer that ship and bring it back on time and will make it look easy, and there'll be no panic and no fuss, and it'll just happen nicely. Or a bad duty officer, by definition, will turn a little bit of delay into a calamity and completely sink the ship, and obviously that's not what we want. And all of those things come down to how we manage that person's competence and how we assess them. So I think that's it for the slides. Yes, it is. Let's move over to the template. So I've got about 4 Word documents for you today. This is the Competence Management System document, and then I've got the assessment sheets. As I said before, do feel free to mention in the comments, as Adam did, if you've got anything interesting to add, to share your best practice, or if you think something is a particularly good or bad idea. And as I say, I always encourage people to definitely comment if you disagree, and I might disagree with you and say this is the reason why I disagree. That's absolutely fine. But then at least everybody else watching can see, oh, Danny said this, that other person said that. Both have put up arguments. We'll pick the argument that we like the best, or we'll pick what we think is the most sensible answer. And that's what this is all about. Not me telling you what to do, but everybody having the opportunity to give their point of view. Right, so competence management system document for the duty officers department. And as you'll remember, when we talked about competence management, we said here is how it's managed for the whole railway, and every department will have its own sub-document that explains how C1, the overall competence management system, will be implemented in each of the departments. So C1 still exists, and this cannot deviate from C1. This is the description of how the duty officers department is going to comply with it. So, eyes down, here we go. This document details the competence management process for duty officers and how the requirements of HOPS SMS C1 are complied with. Just in case you haven't seen before, this red text is text that I definitely imagine you need to change if you're going to use any of the text from this document. Obviously, you can change any of it you like, but if you do choose to copy this paragraph or any paragraph that's got red in it, the red is designed for what's for you to change. Selection, first of all. So if you remember, C1 said the departments must describe how their staff are going to be selected. So candidates must have a good level of management and leadership ability before being considered for training as a duty officer. A high level of railway operating experience is required either at this railway or an equivalent elsewhere. At least one operating competence must be held, or an equivalent level of experience, and a guards or signalman's or footplate rules paper completed. And it took a lot of discussion to get to that conclusion, to make sure that we don't exclude anyone that could be a really good candidate just because they happen to have come from a different railway, but to make sure that we gather enough evidence about what the rules are here and what the local knowledge is here on this railway before we let them loose, potentially on their own, being in control of it. There is no automatic progression to duty officer, so there's no right to be a duty officer. No one should be able to demand it. It is an honour to be selected to be duty officer and to be in control of what's going on. Candidates may request to be considered or may be invited. There's only one role that we're going to have in the department, and that's going to be the role of duty officer. If you remember, the roles, in terms of the definition of this SMS, the roles are the jobs that there are to do. So goods guard and passenger guard, or air guard and vacuum guard, are examples of the roles that one day we will have in a workshop like this. We talk about the guards department. In the footplate department, you might have driver and fireman, or you might just have one and call it footplate, and so on and so on. So there's only going to be one role here. Of course, if you have two levels of command, and especially I see this on event days where you might have a sort of a deputy or a superintendent, or for those people who work on the main line, an AOM type equivalent, you might have another role here with a different competence requirements to be the sort of the assistant to the duty officer. These are going to be the grades. There's only going to be 3 levels of grade. Training, which is a fairly standard one, which almost every department has. Competent, which is what we're going to call our, yep, you're passed out, you're now a duty officer. But then we're also going to have this grade called advanced duty officer. And I'm sure you can see what's going to happen. These are going to be the people who are going to do the training and the assessing and everything else. Okay, training as a duty officer takes place while shadowing an existing advanced DO. Oh, there it is already. Each candidate is judged on their merits by the head of department as to the level of training required. So somebody's got to be in charge of all these DOs. Remember, my favourite thing is everyone should have a line manager. Every bit of work going on the railway should be managed by a manager somewhere. Quite often the head of department of the duty officers department is the operations manager or the general manager or somebody like that. Training must include the following: at least 1 day of disruption or special event day before passing out. It's no good doing all your training on quiet one train days if there's then no limit to you managing a special event day. Instruction in aspects of signalling, loco and guarding. And this is why I've said that the candidate will be judged on their merits by the head of department as to the level of training required. Because if the person is already a competent signalman or already a competent driver, they're not going to need any instruction in the aspects of signalling or loco respectively, but it might be a good idea for them to go out for a couple of round trips or a day or however much you decide is appropriate with a guard so that they can get a good understanding of what that guard does. The same for P-Way and S&T. Go and spend half a day with the P-Way or half a day with the S&T if you've never had any experience of those things before, or if you have, then let's just write down what that experience is so that we can demonstrate why we're not doing that particular part. And instruction in aspects of the company commercial and frontline processes. If you expect your duty officer to get involved in those, or if they might in extremis, so they can at least understand what happens if you have a landslide and you have to cancel all the trains and there's 500 angry people who want refunds, to make sure that that can actually happen. Thank you very much to Tom in the comments, who's asked, would a Rio be included in the roles here? Well, it certainly potentially could. If you decided that a Rio, a rail incident officer, was like a higher level duty officer, then absolutely you could put it either as a separate role or just in the line of progression in the grades. Or you might decide that Rio lives in a separate department. It really doesn't matter how you write the documents, how you break it up into departments at all. But yeah, good point. Rio definitely could be in this line of promotion for duty officers. So we expect the duty officer to have knowledge of all of these things in these 4 bullet points, and if they don't already satisfactorily have it, then we will arrange to give it to them as part of their training to be a duty officer. And I do realise, incidentally, that on a heritage railway, quite often, no matter how much I might like to say the duty officer should be proactive and keep their finger on the pulse, that most days everything does run fine and the duty officer is sitting there, not waiting for something to go wrong, but keeping their finger on the pulse of something that's working perfectly fine, and you end up thinking, well, there's not actually that much to do here. And certainly where I've seen what I would consider to be really good deployments of duty officers, there are lots of other duties that they do where they go and carry out monitoring visits to signal boxes or drivers, or they check up on the stores, or they scan the competence paperwork and upload it to HOPS or wherever it's uploaded to, or they check up on who didn't sign out yesterday and how many hours we're going to account for them, and all these other things that if they don't happen today because the duty officer is really busy, it doesn't matter, they can happen tomorrow, but it keeps the duty officer occupied and engaged in being the duty officer. If it turns into the sort of job where you just turn up and do nothing for 8 hours, then nobody's going to want to do it. Oh, Alex Sill from the South Devon Railway has just pointed out, and no, I hadn't thought of it in the best practice, I must admit, but I can definitely add that in, that a duty officer may require better than average route knowledge. Yeah, that's really good, especially when it comes to responding to incidents or directing the emergency services or any of that sort of thing, or if a train fails in the middle of nowhere, that better than average route knowledge is a really good idea for a duty officer. And in fact, route knowledge is something that could be obtained by any of those, well, the first 3 at least of those bullet points, so that you know where things are. Right, the following competencies are required for positions in this department, and this is a template of going through these headings and having these tables is exactly what I've used in all the department templates. Obviously, where I've used this on various railways, I've taken out a lot of the specifics in order to give it to you as a template, but this is the template that I always use. So there's only one role, so there's only one table. The head of the columns is the different levels within that role, training, qualified, advanced. Remember, that's what we said. And then down the side is the elements that are going to be required for each of the levels. So if you're already a HOPS user, you'll be well used to the fact that roles require elements, and an element can be required by more than one role, or no roles at all. So first of all, you've got to have your work permit or your ID card or whatever it is, the bit of paper that officially authorises you to be a person on the railway, be a worker on the railway. You've got to have that before you even start training. You've got to have had, for example, your safety management system briefing or induction or railway safety or whatever it is that you call it. Got to have had that before you start training. PCS, or again, whatever the equivalent you have is, Medical 1, and if you've ever discussed medicals with me before, I call them Medical 1 and Medical 2, following broadly the HRA guidance that Medical 1 is for everyone except those who control trains, and what I call Medical 2 is for those that control trains. So duty officer requires a Medical 1, basis they're not going to be directly controlling trains. Then there's all the rules stuff. And what I've done here is I've sort of indicated, you will obviously put in your own rules exams, whatever you call them, whether you call them ABCD for the rulebook modules or whether you call them guard, driver, signalman. And I've given an example here that rulebook section A and B, which is often the sort of introductory discipline and track safety stuff, is required before you even start training. Some of the other sections, and I just carried on the alphabet and went C and D all the way up to Z, are required before you pass out. So some rulebook modules might be required before you're even allowed to start training, and rightly so, and some of them might not be actually required until you pass out because you might have never done them before, and that's what you're learning while you're training, is the sections of the rules that the other jobs that you've done on the railway haven't trained you for. Then there's some specific DO stuff. These are the 3 templates that I've got for you: a DO theory assessment, a DO practical assessment, and an advanced DO promotion interview. And as you can see, the theory and practical are required for the qualified, and the theory and practical and interview are required for the advanced. Okay, hopefully nothing too controversial so far. Assessment: candidates will be assessed by a duty officer assessor, and I know I always like to go off on tangents, but I've seen here before, candidates will be assessed by the operations manager, or candidates will be assessed by the general manager. That's not the correct way to do it. It doesn't matter who the assessor is. The important thing is that they've got to be an assessor. Now, if you choose to make the only person who is a DO assessor the operations manager or the general manager, that's absolutely fine. It's up to you who you make a DO assessor, but the important thing is that they're a DO assessor. It's not an important thing that they are a general manager or an operations manager. Right, I'm just having a look at some of the comments that are coming in, talking about PTS and safety inductions that have been done at the Spa Valley Railway. Excellent, very good to know. So candidates will be assessed by a DO assessor on the relevant competence elements required for their appointment. Assessments take the form of a combination of practical observation and scenario questioning. Evidence is also collected from the DO log and other record systems of candidates' performance. Of course, I would recommend that the DO log is a function log in HOPS, but I won't go off down that rabbit hole just at the moment. Each component of the assessment is graded 1 to 4. 1 is an unsatisfactory. That's like a major on your driving test. And if you get any 1s, if any of your answers are unsatisfactory, or any of your performance, let's say, in trying to satisfy the assessor that you meet that criteria, if you get a 1, that's it. It's got to be a not competent. I changed my story there from if your answer is a 1 to if your attempt to satisfy the assessor is a 1, because I'm very keen that an assessment decision is not 100% wholly based on the answers to questions, whether they're verbal or written. The assessor is the assessor who will assess whether the person is competent or not. And the answers to the questions are just one of the many things they will take into consideration when making that decision. Adam again. Oh, Adam, you're buzzing in quite a lot today. Thank you very much. Adam from the Forest Dean Railway. A couple of odd questions. Can there be an ability in elements for minimum length of service or user has held competencies? Well, certainly none of those exist in HOPS at the moment. I would be careful of minimum length of service, because quite often the longest serving people are not necessarily the most competent. And we may find that we undesirably exclude somebody who is perfectly fit for the job, even though they're perhaps not old enough to have that length of experience. I would assess people on the assessment criteria and on their management ability and on their technical ability, and no matter how old or experienced they are, give them the job. Right, let's have a look. So Paul has pointed out that at Didcot Railway Centre, the duty manager will act as a RIO if an incident occurs. This avoids confusion over who controls what when one person, the duty manager, leads delegating if appropriate. Yep, absolutely. And thankfully, we don't tend to have a huge number of incidents, in inverted commas, on heritage railways, such that we don't have 24/7 on-call Rio staff waiting to spring into action, and thank goodness for that. So yes, I'd say it's perfectly acceptable for it to be the practice that a duty officer might step up to be a Rio and somebody else steps up to cover the duty officer role, or the duty officer stays in the office and they appoint somebody else to be the Rio. However you want to arrange it is fine, and certainly for those of you who've been to Didcot Railway Centre and know the site, clearly that's going to require a slightly different thought process and discussion and a slightly different response to, for example, the Severn Valley or the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which are obviously very long, thin railways rather than sites, large sites with lots of area. Right. So where are we now? This is great. Thank you very much, Peter Whiteley. Important that the assessment criteria is defined. Absolutely. You cannot assess somebody unless you have a criteria to assess them against. And the other Word documents that I'll show you are what I've got for you on that. So anyway, each component of the assessment is graded 1 to 4. 1 is an unsatisfactory. If you get any 1s, it must lead to a not competent. 2 is competent but required prompting. 3 is competent, no prompting required. That's the sort of middle of the road. And 4 is an excellent candidate, exceeded the performance requirements. And an assessor will always record some comments for any component of the assessment that scores a 1, 2 or a 4. And that paragraph about assessments is pretty much the same across all of these documents that I've written, and it's the same as it is in C1, that if we can have a consistent grading system across the railway, as far as we can, can't always, but as far as we can, I think it helps a lot in strengthening what we expect from assessors and making it easy for the railway to confidently know that it is just discharging assessments in a consistent way. Okay, assessment outcomes. The ultimate assessment result can only be binary. The candidate is either competent or not competent. And every assessment will have to end up with one of those two results. In the event of a not competent result, the candidate, assessor and the head of department will discuss the result and agree a suitable method and time of further training or whether training will cease. The head of department's competence decision... the head of department's... The word competent shouldn't be in there. The head of department's decision on whether training should cease or continue is final. So just because a candidate gets a not competent in an assessment, first of all, does not mean that is automatically the end of the road. And secondly, it definitely does not mean that the assessment should be thrown in the bin because it's of no good or no value. It is of a lot of value, especially to the railway in demonstrating that it's assessing people and not everybody always passes out. Because if you can only demonstrate that everybody always passes out, I would question how good your assessment process is. So the not competent result will be recorded, the candidate will get some feedback, and then the manager or the assessor or whoever it's going to be and the candidate will discuss what this means and what the appropriate way forward is. And I've deliberately left it as vague as that. I haven't said, if you get between 90 and 95%, you're allowed to have another go, or if you get below 70, then you're not, because I don't believe in any of that stuff. We do what's appropriate at the time, rather than just sticking to some numbers that are pretty arbitrary. Competence expiry. Once passed out as a competent duty officer, the competence will last for 2 years. The recertification assessment process is the same as the initial passing out process for the relevant elements. And again, this has caused quite a bit of discussion as well, because most jobs, especially on a railway, you pass out for them once, and it's a big job to pass out for them. And then 2 years later, you do a recert, and the recert is sort of slightly less onerous than the initial assessment was. But we went with that the duty officer will just do the full passing out thing every 2 years. And the reasons for that are times change, expectations change, risk perception changes. And even though we might not massively change the rulebook every year, or we might not massively change the signalling instructions every year, at a high level in the railway, what we're delivering and what risks we're prepared to accept and what's going on in the rest of the industry and the rest of the world will determine how we should be managing and how we should be delivering our service on a day-to-day basis on the railway. So every 2 years, we'll go through the whole thing again with every duty officer. And when you come to see the assessment criteria that I have provided, I hope you will agree that it's not a bad thing, but reserve judgment on that one until you've seen the assessment criteria, if you don't mind, please. Lapsing, and if you remember, I always stick to this terminology, expiring is a drop-dead date that you get when you're passed out, such as this is valid for 2 years and then it's not valid anymore. Lapsing is the amount of time you're allowed to go without doing that job before your skills are deemed to have faded. So a competence will lapse if a duty officer does not carry out a turn for a period of 6 months. That's how far we decided you could go without being a duty officer before we thought you might have not fully kept in touch with everything that's going on. And not be sufficiently confident in your ability to discharge your duty officer role. So 6 months. In the event of a duty officer's competence lapsing, the head of department will determine the appropriate level of refreshing or retraining required and agree this with the candidate. A reassessment may be undertaken if required by the head of department. This is because a person might not do a duty officer turn for 6 months, but every single weekend they've been working elsewhere on the railway as a driver and a signalman and a guard. And clearly that person will have kept their finger on the pulse of what's going on the railway and probably been talking to duty officers and still know what's going on and reading the one and all those things. And the head of department may say, well, just come into the office, we'll have a quick chat through what's been going on for the last 6 months, and then I'll either decide that I'm happy with it or I'm not. Or the head of department might say, well, you haven't been to the railway at all for the last 4 of those 6 months, so I think it would be a good idea if you did a refresher turn with Bill on Friday, and you shadow Bill for the day, and that will give the opportunity for discussion and questions to arise about what's going on, or the fact that, that's changed since the last time I was here, and then you can be refreshed, and obviously we'll record that to make sure that we can demonstrate it later. You might think, and especially for me, that some of this is not as strict as you might expect. And normally my sort of middle name is write it down and be strict about it. And I am a lot stricter with this sort of stuff in other safety critical roles. But I'm conscious that because the duty officer role, as well as being an operational role, is very much a management role, and because there's a relatively small number of people doing it compared to other roles, that a lot more flexibility is required in how we're going to manage these duty officers. Wherever we've written into this competence management document something where the head of department will decide, or this will be judged on a case-by-case basis or whatever, it's important to record when passing the person out or refreshing them or doing whatever it is, what the rationale for our decision-making was. Whereas when we come to do a workshop like this on guards, for example, it will say, if you don't do it for more than 6 months, you must do another refresh. If you don't do it for 8 months, you must redo the assessment. If you don't do it for 10 months, you must be retrained again, or whatever it's going to be. It'll be a lot more strict in the other safety critical roles. Just to go to the comments for a moment, Graham from the Christ Tramway has pointed out that the expiry will resolve the issue of the people who think they can keep the role as they have always done it since 1803. Yep, absolutely. And any safety critical role needs to be maintained. I would struggle to think of any safety critical role where you can pass out once and then do it forever. There are some components of competence, there are some elements of competence, where as long as you continue to practice it, then we can justify that you're maintaining your competence. If a reduction in the level of skill is self-evident, if it's self-revealing, if it starts to deteriorate, it will be recognisable straight away. But no, and I've certainly been involved in workshops and discussions with railways before about exactly that subject. What do we do with the people who started the railway? I was like, well, you assess them every 2 years, the same as you assess everybody else. And sometimes there's a sharp intake of breath to say, but Brian won't let anyone else assess him. Well, unfortunately, Brian will have to leave the railway then, because you can't have somebody who won't be assessed. What you can do, and what I think is appropriate to do, as long as you've got 3 at the top that can assess each other in a triangle, best 3 than 2 when they're assessing each other. Otherwise, they could say, well, you didn't give me a point for that, so I'm not going to give you a point for this. But if you can have 3 assessing each other at the top, maybe the 3 inspectors or the 3 managers or the operations manager, the general manager and the guards inspector or whatever it is can do each other. And then perhaps it takes away some of the, embarrassment that the guards inspector who's been here since 1803 is being assessed by the assessor who's only been here for 3 years. We can do things like that to improve it, but ultimately the length of service or the level of seniority that somebody has is not mentioned in ROGS anywhere. ROGS just says that we've got to be able to demonstrate that we've trained and assessed people and that we're monitoring their competence. So it definitely applies to everyone. But I'm sure that I'm preaching to the converted, to the people who are on this call. Right, so 6 months, that's the thing. Here's the bit about monitoring. The duty officer, oh, in fact, this is very similar to what I was just saying. The duty officer performance is routinely monitored by the general manager, in red so you can change it, with whom duty officers closely work and any performance issues addressed. If performance is reduced to an unacceptable level, the head of department or general manager will withdraw the duty officer's competence and decide whether retraining may take place, and if so, to what extent, and what reassessment requirements should apply. Again, it's not absolutely nailed into stone there as to what the criteria is as to what an unacceptable level is, because it's very, very difficult for duty officer. Much easier for things like signalman and guard and driver to say what the actual acceptable level is, but we have to allow railways to manage duty officers doing the tasks that they're required to do. So duty officer, although I have said here that it is one of those roles where performance degradation might become apparent for the day-to-day tasks, that's not true to say for the rare reactionary emergency tasks. And that's why, even though a reduction in day-to-day performance is self-revealing, we've still said it's a 6-month lapse and a 2-year expiry. Trainers and assessors, only advanced DOs may train new DOs. Assessors are selected from the pool of advanced DOs. Progression, duty officers when first passed out will be competent. After completing at least 6 months service and at least 6 duty officer turns, candidates may be invited to complete an advanced duty officer interview. All advanced duty officer appointments are first ratified by the head of department. And I have deliberately said head of department here rather than assessor because as far as I've written this template, the progression from competent to advanced is purely a managerial level of appointment rather than a different level of competence. As you'll see when we come to look through, well, I call it competence criteria, having just said it's not competence, but the criteria, let's say, for moving from competent to advanced is not technical at all, it's all managerial. Yes, I'm not going to read these comments about coffees and chats and things like that, but yes, I've certainly seen some pretty horrific excuses for assessments in the past. Only advanced or assessor DOs may train new candidates. And that is the end. Only 5 pages, and 2 of those are the contents page of the Duty Officers Department Competence Management System document. It is the smallest of all the Department Competence Management document systems that I've ever written, but it shows how in this one role department we're going to comply with C1, the Railway Competence Management System. That's how it is. Everybody will know it, nobody can bypass it, the assessors know what to do, the candidates know what to expect, it's all written down, you know the score. So let's now go to the assessment criteria documents that I've written. So first of all, the theory. Here's the theory document, if I can quite lay my hands on it. Here it is. And again, it's a template which I may have showed you before, I can't remember, but I use the same template for everything. This is in landscape, by the way, just to make it a bit easier to write the answers on, I find. Excuse me. Candidate name, candidate HOPS number. I'm very delighted that a lot of railways use the HOPS number as the unique identifier. So if you've got 2 Brian Smiths, you can tell the difference. But obviously, whatever number you give your staff so that you can tell identically named people apart, put in there who the assessor was and what the date is. This assessment to be conducted verbally and the assessor to record comments on the answers given. So the first thing, before we even get into asking the candidate any questions, is does the candidate have operational competence, or have they completed a rules exam for one of the operational competencies and have equivalent operational or management experience from elsewhere? The wording of which is exactly the same as in the document we just read, because we said it was required. So here's where the assessor will record, yes, they have operational competence, or yes, they have equivalent from elsewhere, or what the rationale is for what's going on. Assessor to give advice to the candidate. The questions require you to give some reasoned responses regarding how you might act and what you might expect to happen and why. And why is underlined because, particularly in the case of a duty officer, we want them to understand why things are happening or why they're required to do something rather than just doing it by rote. The important thing is not so much the decisions that you make, as long as they are reasonable, but more the thought process behind them. Now, I've made one question in this duty officer assessment, and then I've given you a load of other examples, which I'll come to in a minute. On the second page, there it is. Because what I didn't want to do is put on the internet my duty officer question paper and ruin every railway that I've ever used it with's ability to use it. So I'm spilling the beans on one question so that you can get the hang of what I'm going on about here. So I'll sit as the assessor in front of the candidate duty officer and I'll say, it's a 2-train day and you receive a call from the signalman at wherever advising of the following. As the trains were about to pass at the location, the down train reported a large line-side fire inside the boundary fence at some location. Describe your actions through to resuming normal working. And this text obviously won't be here. This will all be blank boxes. And these are the model answers that I've written in. So hopefully the duty officer will come back. I'll establish the location of the fire. And if they don't offer the reason, you can say just before, yep, that's very good. But just before you go on, why is it important to establish the location of the fire? And hopefully they will say, to ensure the line is properly protected and that the emergency services can be sent to the correct site. And you'll go, yep, very good. And then they'll say, I'll establish its proximity to the line and whether it's safe to run trains. And if they haven't got the hang of it by now, you'll say, yep, very good. Why? And they'll soon get the hang of the fact that everything they say, they have to then say why it's important. To ensure the duty officer has good confidence that trains are being operated safely and to assist the signalman in making decisions. Because if it's 30 metres away from the line, it might not be such a problem. Or if it's 30 metres away from the line and it's an entire factory on fire, then maybe it is a problem. But establish the proximity to the line. Ensure the signalman has protected the line properly. Ensure the fire brigade is called. Obviously, it's not relevant to the workshop that I go through each of these things in detail because a lot of them will be local to you. But this is just to give you an example of the sort of level of detail that I've gone to when I've done this on railways, or what I've seen from other railways that have done it. So we'll ensure the fire brigade is called. We'll agree with the signalman the course of action, which could perhaps be to turn trains back or run round at a certain location. Ensure that the passenger service is not forgotten and that passengers are just left in the middle of nowhere for ages. That we maintain communication by advising signalmen and stations. That we arrange for a suitable railway representative. Whoops, sorry, I just hit the microphone. We arrange for a suitable railway representative to attend the site. Arrange for the protection of the obstruction or the emergency services. Deal with or appoint a person to deal with passengers or inquiries or complaints when they arrive. And hopefully all that stuff comes first, and then all that safety stuff, and then we consider the service options, deal with passengers who are stranded, liaise with the person on site while the fire brigade attend, and agree with the person on site when the incident is cleared and they will give up their possession. So I thought of 13 things to write there. I'm sure if I didn't have this in front of me, and if you asked me what I would do, I probably wouldn't be able to think of all 13 of them, but hopefully I'd spend a good 5 or 10 minutes explaining to the assessor what my answer to this relatively simple question is, because there's an awful lot to do here. There's an awful lot of management, there's an awful lot of rules, there's an awful lot of things to understand. And the candidate, of course, might not go through them in the right order, or just write them in as they do them. Or you might decide you are actually going to leave some of this text in here, or some bullet points or something, and the assessor can tick when the candidate says the right answers or the model answers. However you want to do it is absolutely fine. The important thing is it's recorded what they said and what they didn't say, and what you had to prompt them on, what they were excellent at, or what they were unsatisfactory. So by putting a tick in one of these columns, and if it's anything other than a 2, writing some comments in the box, this is how we're going to collect this competence evidence, or the evidence that we conducted the assessment and that we found that they were competent, or, of course, that they were not competent. Then I've got some assessors' follow-up points. So when they've run out of steam on all that stuff that I've put up there, what about this? Who, internally, might you additionally advise of the incident of an incident so serious as to disrupt train services? Well, I might advise the general manager, because they probably quite like to know that their railway's falling to pieces. Or I might advise the commercial office so that when people ring up, they can give information, or they can put on Facebook to say, we're very sorry that everything's running late at the moment. Please feel free to speak to any of our members of staff if you need help, or whatever it's going to be. It always helps to communicate with the public, of course. What equipment has the potential to be damaged by a line-side fire, and what effect might this have on the railway? So, for example, Hopefully we'll get a mention of signalling cables, which might lead to the loss of token machines and the requirement to introduce pilotman working and all that stuff. That the track and sleepers might be damaged and it might be necessary to refer to the permanent way, or the boundary fencing might be damaged. All things that I would say that if you asked me about a line-side fire, I wouldn't come up with those things as my first answers. I'd hopefully come up with some of that stuff above in the table. But if you then, after I'd done all that, prompted me to say, well, come on, Danny, think about some other equipment, I'd go, oh my God, yes, boundary fences and token machines and things like that. And it's just a way of probing out further useful information and developing that person's understanding of the role as much as expectations of what this assessment is about. It may be the case that volunteers offer to go to site to fight the fire. How should this be dealt with? And of course the answer is to leave it to the fire brigade. I haven't made a table for this. I have tended in the past to just write the comments in the white space on the page, but of course it could be turned into a table. That's not a problem. Right, so that's one example question that I'd expect the candidate to take 5 or 10 minutes to tell me all about, and I'll give them some scores. And I'd expect this theory assessment paper to have 6 or 8 of those questions in it, so that the assessment takes about an hour or so. As I said, I'm not going to give away all my questions because I think every railway that I've involved in writing questions for will not appreciate me making them public. So there's a little template for you. So you can write your own questions, and don't be afraid to put local questions in there, things that are specific to your railway. And here are some scenarios that I've written that you might want to think about writing questions about. So managing infrastructure defects scenario, if there's a broken fish plate or a buckled rail or just a bump reported or something like that, although you might say, oh, that's in the signalman's rules to deal with, the duty officer doesn't have to deal with that. I would like you to expect the duty officer to keep control of the situation and to know what the signalman is doing, and to give the signalman guidance if he needs it, and all those things. Managing a signalling system defect scenario, such as the failure of token machines. And certainly, I know that duty officers have a good role to play there, especially if a duty officer does the duty officer role more frequently than a signalman does the signalman role. So first of all, when the signalman rings up to say the token machines have failed, the duty officer can say, have you got on detection in your home signal? Has the other signal box definitely put the token in? Have you tried holding the button in for 5 seconds because it might just be the batteries are getting a bit sluggish? Count up how many tokens you've got. Is it the right number of tokens? Etc, etc, etc. And maybe, and in fact in my experience quite often, talk the signalman round to going, oh yeah, of course I can't get another token out because I've already got one out. It's on the desk. And instead of going off down the failure of token system route and needing to implement pilot working and importing all that risk, you've actually resolved the scenario. Apparently I might have gone a bit out of focus, but other people are saying it's fine. Okay, sorry if I've gone out of focus. As Phil says, it may be your internet connection or it may be mine. Poorly reported rolling stock defect scenario, and poorly reported is definite, is deliberate there, and you could add the word poorly reported onto the beginning of anything to make it interesting for the duty officer, that if somebody just walks into the office and says, oh, this is broken, that the onus is on the duty officer to go, whoa, hang on a minute, describe to me how it's broken, exactly which piece of equipment is broken, what's the impact of the fact that it's broken. It will improve asset stewardship, that the defects are being reported better, but it will also make sure that the response is appropriate and that something that actually has a safety risk isn't overlooked, or that something that doesn't have a safety risk isn't overreacted to. Significant service disruption, managing the safety risk impact and the commercial impact. Trains crossing at different passing loops, drivers and station staff being taken out of their comfort zone of what normally happens. All those sorts of things have an impact that the duty officer can have a big positive impact on. Dealing with staff required to work over hours due to service problems, SPAD reported scenario, train enters the tech section without the token scenario, trespassers on the line scenario, serious public injury incident scenario, train disabled in the section requiring assistance scenario, train disabled in the section for an excessive length of time scenario. Top gen is, I have heard from a few railways over the last year or so when visited by the ORR, that they're asked about their stranded trains policy. So if you don't already have one, I'd suggest that you write one for just how you're going to manage the scenario when a train is stuck in the middle of nowhere for a very long time. Some of the risks are greater on heritage railways than they are on the main line. For example, no central door locking to stop people getting off. The fact that staff on the train are likely to be volunteer staff who don't do it every single day of their lives and are not as confident in dealing with this situation as employed staff who have probably experienced it before. And also the attitude of the public, that in many cases they think it's just a toy and it's not a real railway and it doesn't really matter if we just jump off and walk down the track. So an important thing to think about, and certainly for duty officers who again are going to be playing a role in leading that scenario. Discovery of staff working without the proper competence, that's another good one, how you manage that. And confrontational managers scenario. This is a brilliant one to discuss with people, because you are the duty officer. And if you decide that the 10 o'clock is going to be held until 10:15, that is the end of the matter, no matter how much the driving examiner screams at you. And to de-escalate that conversation so that that situation, so that everyone gets to put their point of view across, and then a conscious decision is made, hopefully before either side really digs their heels in. But if you're the duty officer, you're responsible. You've got to live and die by the decisions that you make, even if other people don't like them. Right, so there's a list of scenarios that I thought of and other things that I've written questions on in the past that you can use this template to adapt to your local to your local circumstances and what's important to you. And as I said, about 6 or 8 of them, so that the assessment takes about an hour. Right, then there's some technical things. So regardless of which route a person has taken up their competence to arrive at being a duty officer, there are some things that I think duty officers ought to know. Explain the functionality of the electric token block machines. Obviously, if you don't have electric token block machines, you don't need to bother to ask, but since most standard gauge heritage railways work on the electric token block system, and it's a big opportunity for things to go wrong when the electric token block system fails or is misused, really important for the duty officer to properly understand how it works. And not just the fact that it dishes out tokens, but the fact that the mechanical interlocking between the machines allows a token to be taken out or put in any combination. If 2 tokens are taken out, the fact that you will be able to get a third one, all that sort of stuff. Why are there numerous tokens in the machines when only one train can use the single line at a time? I'm not worried about revealing these answers to anybody that is watching this video, incidentally, because these are the answers that we want people to know. This is like revision aid for anybody who's going to potentially become a duty officer. If you turn up in the exam and you've managed to memorize all these answers, well, you haven't cheated. What you've done is you've learned how to do the job. Right, scrolling up a little bit, explain the functionality of the vacuum brake system. And if you have air brakes, then I'd suggest adding a question to say explain the functionality of the air brake system as well. Again, a very high risk thing that could go wrong, a very high risk thing if it goes wrong. Really important that the duty officer properly understands what risks they're taking when they start getting involved in managing incidents where, in this example, the vacuum brake system is involved. Explain the Swiss cheese model of accident propensity insofar as it applies to railway-related risk. This is a really good model, and I think all duty officers should know it, that if you've got 10 slices of cheese with holes in, it's fairly difficult to put your finger through all 10 in one go. Every slice of cheese represents a safeguard. The more safeguards you take out, the more chance there is that you'll find a way of putting your finger through all the slices of cheese all at the same time, and that's when an accident happens. If you're not already familiar with the Swiss cheese model of accident propensity, then look it up, and then make all your duty officers look it up as well. Section 7, managerial. These are managerial things. What action should a duty officer take if a platform becomes dangerously overcrowded? In the event that a member of staff does not arrive for duty, how to obtain emergency or next of kin contact details for a member of staff? Demonstrate understanding of the railway's requirements when an incident occurs that is reportable to the ORR or RAIB. And I've left that one blank because it seems I don't think there is a best practice on that really. Every railway has something different. Some require the duty officer to report it. Some require them to escalate it. I don't think there's a best practice and a non-best practice, as long as obviously you comply with the reporting timescales. You can put the answer bullet points into that one yourself. Understands the process for escalation of issues or obtaining support from a manager. And what action should a duty officer take if required to deal with a situation for which there are no rules? Because that's a great time when everyone's going to look to the duty officer for guidance. And again, if you have a dynamic risk assessment process, then you can make reference to that in there. But if not, I think I would expect a duty officer to use their managerial skill to decide what's going to happen. And then the same as with all these templates and an outcome, and it's got to be either competent or not competent. Both parties sign it, and the assessor writes some feedback in there. And sometimes I see these and they're really comprehensively filled out in tiny writing, so there's loads of comments, loads of feedback, and sometimes they're not. Feedback is always good, of course. The more you can write, the better. Feel free to write in the blank spaces or on the back of the page or anything like that in order to achieve the desired goal, which is to properly assess this person's competence and then make a decision on whether they're going to be allowed to do the job or not. So this is what I would have with the duty officer in the office. And once they, or before or after, I don't suppose it matters, they have convinced us on the theory, they can then have fun convincing us on the practical. And this is my practical assessment template. So exactly the same template format. But on this one, I'm going to have the duty officer on duty for the day, and I shall follow them round as the assessor. Maybe I am the official on-duty duty officer, or maybe there's another one, but whatever it is, same as anything, when we do a practical, we expect the candidate to be doing the job as their assessment. So starts the day, establishes if any ongoing issues, communicates with other managers, communicates with staff coming on duty, ensures safety critical staff have reported for duty as booked, passes on messages and instructions for the day to staff, takes a proactive approach to identifying if any issues are on the horizon for the day, considers the weather conditions and what effect they may have, takes a proactive approach to checking the loco or trains or stations will be ready for the first departure, ensures guards checklists are available and ready. I'm really pleased to see how many railways now do guards checklists with the defects on every day. Obviously very pleased where it's from HOPS. And I won't read everything word for word, but there's a during the day section and all the things that we hope that the person will be observed to be doing during the day. And if it happens to be that some of the things on this tick list don't occur during the day, then you'll just have to do it verbally. What's an example? Maintains the duty officer log. And if there is nothing to log, you could say, we haven't had anything to log, but describe to me the sort of things that you would log and how you would log them. And then you can justify that the person is either competent or not. Things about defect reporting, things about control measures on defects, things about faults and failures. And again, it's very unlikely all these things are going to happen all in the same day. My God, wouldn't it be a good assessment if they did? But some of it you will have to do verbally because you can't cultivate all those things. It might be that the candidate can talk about one of these things that's happened during the course of their training. You just write the comments in here about what the candidate did or what they said. It'll be brilliant. In the case of service disruption, failed and stranded trains, operational incidents. In the case of an incident or an emergency, reacts immediately to protect the line, protect the safety of public and staff, reduce the opportunity for the incident to deteriorate. Goes through all this process. Staff welfare, and at the end of the day, all the closing up and locking up stuff. And once again, the same little competent or not competent and feedback outcome. Of course, this is going to need to be much more localised because there are going to be lots of things that different railways do and don't require the duty officers to do. And certainly coming back to the point about the railways that call them controllers and they have a much more controlling in terms of train movement responsibility, I would actually imagine that that part of it will be an element in its own right. And have its own practical and theory and rules exams and all those things. But as with everything, as long as you're an advanced HOPS organisation, of course, you can get your hands on these Word document templates and edit them as much as you like. Right, last but not least then, the final template, and it's just a little small one, is the progression to advanced duty officer interview. And we deliberately made this an interview rather than an assessment because there's no technical difference in the level of competence between a competent duty officer and an advanced duty officer in this template that we've made. It is purely a level of management maturity, let's say. So again, the candidate will sit down in the office with the head of department, or the assessor rather. How does the candidate feel about their own confidence in the duty officer role? Because if they're now going to be training other people in how to do it, we need to feel that they are at least confident in themselves. Have there been any notable incidents to deal with while the candidate has been on duty? How have these been dealt with? How does the candidate feel they dealt with them? What were the lessons learned? Were there any review items from the candidate's previous assessment, scores of 1 or 2? If so, what progress has taken place? Yes, if they've been doing the duty officer role for 3 years, so have had a couple of assessments of that, and they've scored a couple of 2s, then it's probably a good idea to get to the bottom of the 2s and make them at least 3s before they're allowed to progress to be an advanced duty officer. What has the candidate found most challenging in the duty officer role? What does the candidate feel are important aspects in training new duty officers? How many duty officer turns have been completed? The thing about operational experience, again, is the same, and assesses general comments on duty officers' past performance in the role. So not nearly as onerous to progress from being a competent duty officer to an advanced duty officer, but as I've said several times now, as far as I'm concerned, we don't need to have a technical or competence difference. It's just a managerial appointment about how confident you are, and to make sure that you get a little chance to get your feet under the table before you start training and assessing other people. So, unusually for a HOPS Live workshop, it's only 8:10 and I've come to the end of everything that I had to tell you. So, now is your last chance in the next minute or so to ask any questions or make any comments that you want to in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. And as I always say, it's particularly good to make a comment if you disagree with something that has been said, because then we can have a good old discussion about it and other viewers can make an informed choice. But of course, don't feel that you have to disagree if you're quite happy to agree. Yes, so thank you very much to everyone indeed for tuning in. Let's go back to our slides. Here we are. The next HOPS Live workshop will be on Tuesday the 1st of March and will be on the subject of user works level crossings. And oh my goodness me, don't you all have some opinions on managing the risk associated with user works level crossings? So thank you very much indeed to everybody who has written in or sent me their documents. Please feel free still to do so if you haven't already, so that they can be incorporated into a best practice and shared with everybody else. Angus from the Bowness Railway has asked, where are the documents located on HOPS? If you go to the services menu on the left hand side, you'll find SMS workshops is one of the options, or you can go to hops.org.uk/workshops, the URL that's on the screen now, and it'll have a list of all the workshops, and you can click on them to find the templates for the sessions that we've done in the past. And I'm sorry that it sometimes takes me ages in order to get them up there, but I do get quite a lot of feedback afterwards, so it's always good to incorporate that. The one that before Christmas, I'm afraid, took me a very long time, and that was just because I got swamped over Christmas. Graham Danby has asked, who can train the trainer and pass as competent? Well, another trainer will train the trainer and an assessor will pass them as competent. That's the, I hope you don't think I'm being sarcastic when I say that, but that is all that it is. Now, it's a bit more of a difficult question when you say who's going to pass out the first duty officer and the first assessor, and that's the same as it is for any role. Who's going to pass out the first driver? Who's going to pass out the first guard? Now, most competencies on heritage railways are within the gift of the railway company to give. Not things like driving licences and things like that for motor cars, but things like duty officer. It is purely up to the company to decide who's going to be a duty officer and to live and die by that decision. And that's why it is totally within your gift and your responsibility to write what the assessment criteria is going to be, or steal it from the HOPS best practice template, or get it from another railway, and always to make sure that it is suitable for your undertaking. The managers of the railway, the board or the chairman or whoever it's going to be, is going to have to make a decision on who they're going to entrust to deliver the service of the railway. They're going to have to say, we have decided that Barbara is going to be the head of guards, and we have got her CV, and we know from past experience and the jobs that she's done in the past that we're prepared to stand by the competence decisions that she makes. It should only be necessary for Barbara to make 2 dodgy competence decisions. One is to pass out the next person, and the second is to pass out the next person after that. The moment you've got 3, and they can all assess each other in a triangle, they should do that. Even if it was only like yesterday that Barbara was appointed and now she's passed out the next 2 people, one of those people needs to assess Barbara. And although it's sort of, in practical terms, you think, well, it's ridiculous. Why does somebody who just passed somebody out now need to assess the person who passed them out? Well, it's so that we've got this independent evidence. It's so that we can say the best solution, the only reasonably practicable solution, is we appointed somebody on the strength of their CV to start it off. They trained the next best 2 people and passed them out, and then they all assessed each other. And once we've got that triangle, then we can go forward and everyone else can assess everybody else, sort of down the tree, down the hierarchy. They can pass out another assessor if they want to, and then that person can pass people further out. But it's the same in any role, not just duty officer, that ultimately the trustees or the directors or whoever it's going to be of the railway are the people who are ultimately responsible. And by appointing other assessors and allowing those assessors to appoint other assessors and allowing those assessors to pass out duty officers, they're just delegating their responsibility. And it happens in every single industry. It's not something that's specific or bad. It's not something specific to heritage railways. It's not something that's bad. It is just the way it works. And that's why those directors or trustees will ratify the safety management system, will ratify the competence assessment criteria, or one suitably qualified member of them will, so that they can demonstrate that they have given all the support and guidance and parameters within which to work to the people who they entrust to do the subsequent assessing and passing out and then delivery of the job. So hopefully that answers your question, Graham, as who can train the trainer and pass as competent. It's always a really interesting question. One other little thing to add, and again, it's not specific to duty officers, is that, and I'm really pleased to see a lot of railways doing this now, is some training in how to assess for assessors. So that not just the person who we like gets to do the assessing, but we can also demonstrate why we think the person doing the assessing is competent to assess. And whether that's something you deliver internally or externally is up to you, but it's something that more and more railways are thinking about. I don't think it's something that is an absolute expectation in practice yet, but I think it will be very soon. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Graham. Let's just have a look and see if there are any other comments. The basic principles of this could be applied to other roles as well, says Peter Whiteley. Yep, absolutely. And as I say, it's all the same templates that I use, and we will have other workshops on competence for other roles. I just started off on duty officers because it is the smallest one, and so I thought that would be a good one to start with. Phil has written, if you don't have one already, risk assess and see if you can get an external assessment. Well, yes, this is always a controversial subject about external assessments. I must admit, I'm not a huge fan of external assessments for internally managed roles. Yes, okay, external assessments for chainsaw and forklift and things like that. But I think it'll be rather difficult to find a robust arrangement with an external assessor where you can sufficiently define to them the task and what it is they're assessing, for them to make a satisfactory assessment and a satisfactory competence decision. I don't hold with the view that is held in some quarters, and particularly in the mainline railway industry, that just because you're an assessor, you can assess anything. I do think you need to have a very good understanding of what it is you're assessing in order to make the assessment. And again, that's something I'll be very pleased to discuss. And if anyone has other views, genuinely, I always like to have these discussions. So I do always wince a bit when I go to railways and they say they have an external assessor come in and assess their drivers, or an external assessor come in and assess their guards. And I think, oh my goodness me, it's very difficult, I think, to make that a robust arrangement. And in some cases, the arrangement is extremely unrobust, and there's no contract or agreement at all, and it's all very dodgy. Alex has pointed out that if you search for SMS in HOPS, it's the first result. Oh, that's good. Brilliant. Of course, if you have other things in your version of HOPS that use the word SMS, like you have an SMS department or SMS documents, they may well be the first result for you. But certainly, if you search for SMS, you'll find the best practice templates there. Okay, right. Well, I think we've run out of comments now, so thank you very much indeed for those. They were all a good little ending to the workshop. I hope it's been useful for everyone. I'll see you again on Tuesday, the 1st of March, to talk about user work level crossings. And do feel free to send in any last-minute feedback or best practices that you've got, both on the subject of competence management for duty officers and user work level crossings. I'll see you all again on the 1st of March. Thank you very much. Good night. Well done to everybody that stayed to the very end of the music.